He's Jack.
He's Jace.
And we're going to ramble for about 10 minutes.
That's the plan. So in this, we're looking to go through something of the processes that we both follow when running games, of how we go about creating scenarios, our influences in the world, in the characters, in the story. And to start things off, we're going to start with that good old-fashioned plagiarism.
100%.
So before we started recording, we were talking about the ideas that we used and the kind of influences that we take. So, Jace, do you want to start out and
personally,
run through the broad brushstrokes?
Broad brushstrokes, at least when it comes to my end of things. I find one piece of media that kind of captivates me, and then I begin thought experiments essentially to elaborate and extrapolate and turn it into something wildly different than or attempt to turn it into something wildly different than what the source is. That is how a lot of my stories come about. Just as a brief example, the very first game I ever played was somewhat of a twist on Ravnica, City of Guilds.
So, tell us about Ravnica and how it's influenced the world that you ended up creating.
Ravnica is a Magic the Gathering set. It is a plane completely dominated by one city, separated by different guilds, and that was quite literally where they started. Different name. The name of the city was Ashore. And from that, it was a city divided up between guilds with a duke in charge of it, in charge of everything, rather than the whatever they call the leaders, the Pyroons, I believe is how it's pronounced. And this is the time that everybody will realize that I cannot pronounce things, and there will be a horde of angry comments saying, "How dare he mispronounce that magical made-up name?"
Unless there's a pronunciation guide, no one can prove otherwise. So, from using those kind of settings and building from those, how did you then influence your game to be the same but different?
Well, instead of it being in a massive... Well, it was still a massive city, but it didn't cover the entire planet. It was just the most central location. It was essentially a massive trading hub, which is actually how the guilds came to rise as powers in the city, is because it was quite literally centered in the middle of the continent island type thing that it was on, so all resources passed through it at one point or another. So the guilds kind of came out of necessity as a way to create production, as it were. It was by far the most industrialized of the cities. And from that, you had a lot of these entities that were the leaders of their guilds that were world-renowned, and they became center points even after the destruction of the city, which was definitely something that happened much, much later on in Magic. This was way before that happened in Magic, however.
And one thing I've noticed as well is that, especially when you're kind of drawing influence from the real world, is that quite often I've seen quite a few videos on YouTube and other platforms where people are sort of talking about how old cities were made. And what I like to think is the example of Petra, the city of Petra in Jordan. And it basically started with somebody going, "Do you know what would be really, really cool?" And actually taking these ideas and having these slightly more iconic, rather than the standard location city originally built on a river, and you'd have trading points and so on and so forth. Now we're just going to build a city into a rock face. People will remember it. And I think that's really important in games, is wherever you are, is to have that kind of really iconic distinction whenever you've got a major landmark, is adding in those kind of details of this one's built on the rock face, this city flies above the clouds, this is built downwards into the earth. It's something that's going to really make it resonate. I don't know, did you have anything like that with
the Well, as stated, it was a centralized city. The other cities all had their own unique identities. Oh, this is gonna sound really cliche. It was literally based off of the four cardinal directions. There was a city to the north, south, east, west, and the North City was the cold city. The South City was the fiery mountain dwarven city. The city to the east was the elves in the middle of the forest with beautiful water fixtures. The city to the west was in the middle of a desert. So this, as for just referring to the center city, the whole idea was it was your more traditional medieval grand duchy, as it were. Things were stone, things were towering above you. So it was a little bit of a mixture of your, I guess you would say, your medieval city, but combined with almost like modern skyscraper like towers that reached up into the sky, which housed this. The city was known specific outside of being the city of guilds were for their dragon rider warriors, and that was part of the reason why they had so many tall towers in the city, is because they were dragon owleries, essentially, where the dragons would rest, etc.
So now you're going back to that building for purpose, but then using that very distinct architecture to create a very evocative scene, but with a reason. It's not just going, oh, towers are cool. Why would they have those towers? And there you've got it in the narrative straight away. So we're going to keep these very, very short and sweet. They're little ideas that you can begin to play with if you want to potentially go away. If there's a particular film or TV show or video game or piece of media that you're, be it book or whatever it might be that you're currently involved with, and thinking that this would be a pretty cool setting for a game, use it. It's there. So until the next time, when we'll be going into a bit more detail and using a couple of pieces of media, and we'll create our own hypothetical setting on running on those principles. Until then, take care. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.